So today I'm going to recap a tournament that I recently attended. It was a 5-round 2,000 point grand tournament style event in Kingaroy, Queensland. This is formally my local games club that is running this event. I've recently moved, but I like to get back and play the tournaments where I can because although it's a small country town, there's a really great group of players there and they come up with some really interesting lists. No one takes them too seriously, so it's a really fun time and a good opportunity to catch up with those people. This is a club where I would get a game in usually at least once a week, sometimes twice a week. But this year things are a little bit different, a few life changes, and haven't been able to get nearly as much gaming time or hobby time in. So I actually find these tournaments are a really good way to get a lot of games in a short period of time to get my Warhammer fix. In last year's event, I took my 1,000 Suns and I ended up doing pretty good, 3 wins and 2 losses. So this year I thought I would take my Orks. I was especially excited with the latest balance update changes where Ghazghkull Thraka was given a lot more versatility to join different units, boys and knobs. So I thought I would give that a go, and I thought it would give me motivation to try and paint Ghazghkull. I don't currently, or before the tournament, didn't have Ghazghkull painted up. So I gave it a go. I didn't actually make the deadline. I left it way too late. I started painting him only 2 days before I was due to leave. So I had to borrow another gamer who wasn't going to be attending's Ghazghkull. So thank you, Jamie, for that. So I got him in, and here's my list. So I decided to go with Green Tide as the detachment because I wanted to just take a bunch of boys, something a little bit different and something that I had actually never played before. So the centerpiece of the army is Ghazghkull Thraka. Now I wanted to attach him to a big unit of boys. So I've got a unit of 20 boys here. And I've also got a pain boy because I thought the 5-up feel no pain combined with all the boys, the detachment rule giving them a 5-up invulnerable save, and Ghazghkull's toughness and some of the strats would just make that unit really hard to shift. And it's a unit that I would hopefully just move up the board, sit on the middle objective, and just be almost impossible to move off the middle of the board with a whole heap of OC and sticky. It would cause the opponent a huge amount of problems. So to really get the most out of that Green Tide detachment, I wanted to have a few more units of boys. So I've got 2 more units of 20 boys, each with 2 characters. So a war boss leading each, because you need a war boss to lead your boys unit to be able to attach a second character, and they're just really brutal in the war turn. Now originally I wanted to have pain boys in both of these, but I didn't have enough time to paint a 3rd pain boy, so one of them has a pain boy to be like a mini Gaz kind of unit, and then the other one has a weird boy, and that would give me some flexibility to use the jump to move them around, provided I don't roll a 1. So I could really be a bit of a menace putting them in someone's back line, or I could hold them in my back half to screen out until later in the game and then to jump them somewhere where they're needed. Next, I've got a unit of Breaker Boys led by a war boss. It'll give me some anti-tank punch, because I was kind of expecting some knights and vehicles and things like that. Then for some more anti-tank, I've got some tank busters with a big mech to give me some ranged anti-tank firepower if needed. And their blast rockets also make them quite good for dealing with Terminator type units. I decided to take 2 trucks to carry those 2 units around to get them where they need to go, and also after they've discharged their cargo to go and maybe get an objective or do an action. Next I took Boss Snickrot I took him just to give me an option to counter any enemy infiltrators, because the last large tournament I went to, I really had a problem with infiltrators really move blocking me, so I thought he'd do a good job of that. And if he wasn't needed for that, he can just go and hide and be a lone op and do some actions or whatever. Now, one of my out of left field choices was a Rucker Truck Squig Buggy, and really I just picked this guy because I'd recently painted him and I wanted to use him in a game. I thought maybe his indirect might help clear some chaff, and the ability to potentially slow down a unit might also be helpful, but it's really not a very competitive choice. Now, rounding off the list, I've got some Storm Boys and some Grots, because they're essentially mandatory picks. They really help with scoring, and the Grots help with your command point regeneration, and they're cheap, so they're basically a must-have. So we got to the venue. It's a pretty spacious layout and it's attached to an RSL, so there's meals and beers and everything you need to keep you hydrated and fed. And drew my round one opponent, which was Sisters of Battle. It was a bit of a mixed list. I guess the main thing is it did not have Morven Val and her Nundums, but it did have a couple of Armigers. Now, one thing to note for this tournament, it did use the lengthways deployments for a couple of the missions, including the first one. So there was quite a lot of space to deploy, and there was a few more firing lines than normally you would have with the short board edge deployments. So I went first and I pretty much just staged and hit as best as I could. And then my opponent unfortunately made the mistake of coming really strongly out into the midfield onto the middle objectives. And from there, I was able to call a turn to War and just advance and charge and overwhelm. And yeah, that was pretty much it. There wasn't much hope for the poor Toughness 3 sisters and all the fairly light vehicles. So my first round, I got a good 100-point win there. Now, this tournament uses win path and then battle points. So it put me in the way of another 100-point winner from round one, which was Aaron and his Tau. He had auxiliary cadre and yeah, just a combination of Kroot and other auxiliary forces and Tau, making them difficult to hit and buffing each other up. Now, unfortunately for me, this battle round was using Dawn of War deployment and some kind of non-standard terrain layouts, which left just absolutely nowhere to hide in the mid-board or even really in my deployment zone. So I was up against it. I turn one de-jumped my boys into his backline, but he had screened very well with his auxiliary units. And yeah, I just tried to rush over to his side of the board, but just ran into screens and then got gunned down in return. So it was a pretty brutal loss for me there. So my last game of day one was against Jamie, who was another Tau player. He had Monka, and the main thing about his list, it was almost entirely mechanized and it was led by a Storm Surge. This was my favorite game of the tournament, really hard hitting and fun. I made some especially deployment mistakes that probably cost me. Putting Snickerot stupidly out in the middle and exposing one of my units of boys and my tank buster truck to get shot by all of the shooting from the Tau. But it ended up being a very close game. After we'd totaled it up, I thought I had won by 2 points, but actually turned out to be a miscounting. The TO corrected and it ended up as a draw. I think it was 68 points each. So yeah, really great game, and I think my deployment mistakes cost me. And honestly, Snickerot, I deployed him wrong all game, just put way too much exposure on him, and yeah, he just died and did really nothing much for any of my games. So I'll have to work on that, or maybe get some commandos instead. So round 4, which was the first game of the second day, it was against Nathan and his Necrons, and it was a very different list: Annihilation Legion and just all the destroyers and the Shard of the Deceiver, who I've never played against. So for this one, Nathan got the first turn and advanced up probably a little bit too far, and it allowed me to call a turn 1 War and just get into all of his melee destroyers and chop them up. This is actually the second turn 1 War I called. The previous game I also called a turn 1 War. So I was just able to basically pin him in place and just spend the game cutting him down while denying him primary. So I ended up 93 to 19, so it was another big win there. So the last game was against Jesse and his Imperial Knights. Actually not played Knights in 10th, so I was a bit cautious as to whether I could take out that amount of armor. He had the big Knight Lancer and some Warglaives, and they were all really fast, so I was a bit apprehensive there. So Jesse got the first turn and his melee knights just rushed up the board. Fortunately, there was a big piece of terrain to stop his Lancer and one of his Warglaives getting in. Another one did get into Gaz's unit, and it had some kind of enhancement which let it use precision. And unfortunately for him, he forgot to use that, because if he had have killed Gaz turn 1, I think this game would have gone completely different. So instead, I was able to call another turn 1 War. That's 3 turn 1 Wars for the tournament. And Gaz just started eating knights. He just slowly stomped his way up the middle. He killed the Warglaive, he crippled the Lancer, and he killed the other 2 big knights in Jesse's backfield. So it ended up being another 100-point victory to leave me at 3-1-1 for the tournament. So here are the final placings. I ended up coming in 3rd with my 1 draw and 1 loss, and I also ended up winning Best Painted. So it was an improvement on last year, going 3 wins and 2 losses, a slight improvement, but I had a really good time and I hope everyone else did too. So overall, I was really happy with my performance and the way the list worked, especially considering I did not have any practice games at all. So this is a learning from me for all my tournaments, is I really need to practice more if I want to have the best chance of going undefeated or winning a tournament or going 4-1, getting just that extra level ahead to where I have been performing for tournaments. As far as the unit ratings, I would probably give the MVP, if I can't give it to my Grots or Storm Boys, which always perform well, I'm going to give definitely the MVP to Ghazghkull and his boys unit. Ghazghkull is just brutal. He's versatile. He can wreck knights or terminators or infantry. Anything he goes into is going to have a bad time, and all those boys surrounding him just makes him impossible to shift. So Ghazghkull is definitely my MVP. As far as the least valuable players, I would share those between Snickrot and the Rucker Truck Squig Buggy. The Rucker Truck Squig Buggy is really essentially useless. It didn't do anything, it just got blown up. Snickrot, I feel, was more my part, not playing him correctly, just essentially putting him out there to die turn 1 or turn 2 every time, not taking advantage of his abilities. So I think that was more on me. So yeah, I'm going to give the Rucker Truck Squig Buggy the LVP. I want to say thanks to Alex and Gamez Knight for putting on these events and building a really good community. Thanks to all the people who came, my opponents, thanks to the TO. It was just a really good time. Every time I go to a tournament or play the guys there, it's just a really good experience. I'd also recommend anyone who hasn't tried playing a tournament to give it a go. It is a very different way to play. Speed is the main difference between a tournament game and a casual game, you've really got to move quickly and make decisions quickly. But any potential misgivings that or stereotypes that you might have heard about tournament play, I've just never found to be true. Just everyone's just there to have a good time and roll some dice and get a lot of games in. So it's always been a fun time for me. So yeah, I definitely recommend to give a tournament a go. They're really fun and you'll meet some really good people. So I'll leave you now with some pictures of the really beautifully painted armies that were on display for the tournament. Thanks for watching.